Okay, right. I'm just going to start right now because we've got so much to get through today, and I would hate for anyone to miss anything. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on volunteer recruitment. My name is Hannah. I'm the project officer here at Beacon for Rare Diseases. For those of you who are new to us or haven't interacted with us in a while, we are Beacon for Rare Diseases, but we used to be called Find a Cure. We rebranded back in February. We did this because we needed a new identity that better reflects the work that we do. So we have a new vision of No Rare Journey Alone and a new mission to build a united rare disease community with patient groups at the heart. So we're the same team, same vibe, but just a new name and some new branding. Okay, so that's who we are, but what do we do? So our work focuses on three main areas. Our main focus is patient group training, which is what we have today. So we help groups meet their rare challenges by supporting them to form, grow, and professionalize. Another focus is rare research. So we help patient groups find a place at the heart of research they can ensure better outcomes and improve access. We also strive to create a rare disease community by facilitating connections and collaborations. Okay, so today's webinar is part of the series Developing Your Rare Disease Patient Group from the Bottom Up. We've decided to run this series as we know how crucial it is to have the right people involved in your patient group, no matter what stage you're at. So this is the first webinar in the series, and the registration is now open for the second webinar on recruiting staff. And if you just keep an eye out, the third webinar on succession planning will be available to sign up in the coming weeks. So what to expect today? We will cover how to successfully recruit volunteers, including what to put in a role profile and where to advertise. We'll also look at best practice for volunteer induction and tips on how to keep your volunteers active and engaged. We'll also hear a case study from the International Gaucher Alliance, as we think it's really important to get that rare disease voice in there as well. So they'll be talking about their successful volunteer program. Cool. So a quick bit of housekeeping. We'll be using Zoom webinar today. I'm sure everyone is pretty familiar with it by now, but just in case, you can use the chat function at the bottom to interact with your fellow attendees. And if you're having any technical issues, you can report them on there as well, and the Beacon team will try and deal with them. If you do have questions, there'll be time for Q's and A's, but can you just make sure you put the questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, just so we don't miss them or they don't get lost in the chat box. If you particularly like a question, you can like it and we'll see the questions that get liked and we can answer those first. And if you need subtitles, live subscription is on, so you can turn them on or bottom at the bar at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so we have a really great lineup for you today. We've got Dan O'Driscoll, an executive coach and consultant from an engagement consultancy. We have Hannah Bevan from Oxfam and Vesna Alexovska from the International Gaucher Alliance. And the schedule for today, so welcome and introduction, that's me, that's now. And then we'll move on to Dan and Hannah, who will be talking you through the volunteer recruitment journey. And then we'll hear from Vesna for her case study as well. So with that, I will now pass over to Dan and Hannah. So hi guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi Hannah, and hello everyone. Really excited to be here today.
Lovely to meet you all. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Right, I'm going to start sharing my slides. Lovely. Hannah, can you just check that everyone can see those?
I can see.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Then we will make a start. Sorry, too many Hannahs today as well. Sorry about that. Hannah Bevan and Hannah from Beacon. Lovely. So welcome everyone. I hope you're all well. Having a quick look at our participants, I actually know a couple of you on the webinar today. So hello to you and hello to people who I haven't met before, but you're all very welcome. We're really pleased to be here today and excited to take you through this content over the next hour. To introduce myself, my name is Dan O'Driscoll, and I run engagement consultancy where I'm an executive coach and consultant. Previously, I worked at Oxfam where I was head of volunteering and engagement for 8 years. And I also worked at the University of Birmingham when I was head of alumni engagement. So my career background has all been around working with volunteers, supporters, alumni and staff. And in my current business, I mainly work with charities and universities on consultancy projects where my main focus is on strategic planning, audience engagement and L&D. And my executive coaching side takes me to lots of different organisations, from government departments to housing associations. And I'm really pleased that with me today, we have Hannah Bevan. And Hannah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here today. Thank you for having us, and I hope you find it useful. My name's Hannah Bevan. I work for Oxfam. I've been with Oxfam on and off for about 13 years in various different guises. I've worked in the sector generally with volunteers for about 13 years now. I currently work in volunteer engagement and development. That kind of encompasses all areas of the volunteer journey. So this is my thing, and I have a bizarre interest in all things compliance around volunteering. I'm not quite sure how that came about, but the kind of the safeguarding compliance around kind of policy and things like that, that's my bag. And I'm not quite sure why, but it's lovely to be here. And yeah, like I say, hopefully you find this useful.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hannah. So we will be facilitating you through some content today, which is designed to support and generate ideas for you when you're thinking about volunteer recruitment, induction and recognition. It's also an opportunity for that time and space for you to think, ask questions and go away feeling more confident in working with volunteers. And I know from today, there'll be a continuum of attendees as to how much you engage or don't engage with volunteers. But our aim really is to make you feel more confident with engaging and interacting and working with volunteers. And today is really the start of that process. And I just think it's important to bear that in mind. We're not going to have all the answers, but some of the most important aspects of today will be that time to think and consider the content that we will be going through. As Hannah from Beacon has mentioned already, if you have some questions, if you want to pop them in the Q&A chat, at the end of today, there will be some templates that we will share with you for some of the exercises that we're going to take you through, and they will be available by the end of today. So here's the agenda that we'll be running through over the next hour or so. Now, we could run 3 full days on all of this content. There's so much to go through, but we're going to cover off the main highlights of recruitment, induction and recognition, and hopefully we'll just prioritize the main aspects of that, and so that you can go away knowing what you need to do and how you can go and do it. So Hannah's going to take us through the first part, which is around policies, clear offer, application, vetting and support structures.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So again, we'll say this repeatedly, but I'll start by saying it. It's not designed to be daunting. There's lots of detail, lots of information in here. Not all of it will be relevant to all volunteer offers. Not all of it will be relevant to your organisation. But it's just really to get you thinking about which parts are and which parts kind of perhaps are less so. So your shopping list before you go shopping for your volunteers, before you even start thinking about working with volunteers, the kinds of things that you need to have considered and thought through. So firstly, policies. Do you have things like a safeguarding, a health and safety, a volunteer policy? Things like how you will deal with volunteer expenses. Do you have a policy on that? It doesn't necessarily need to be detailed or very difficult, and we've got more on the next slide. Actually, there's quite a lot more on how you can generate these easily if you don't have them. But it's just something that you really need to think about what you've got in place currently, and perhaps if you're going to start working with volunteers or you're going to be sort of expanding what you do with volunteers, what you might need to consider. Having a really clear offer. So many times we see kind of a fairly vague volunteer offer happen. It happens all the time within Oxfam. It's just we need more people, but there's not really necessarily a kind of a really clear ask to the person. So what are they actually going to be doing? So before you create a role or before you think about working with volunteers, think about what you actually need. And Dan covers off more on this later, but thinking about what you're doing at the moment and what the volunteer can do for you. Also thinking about it from the volunteer's point of view, how does it help? What skills do they need to bring to it? What skills will be developed from it potentially? What's in it for the volunteer, but also what does the volunteer see it bringing to the charity? So having a really clear offer. And that's not to say that you can't have kind of fairly ad hoc, little bit of everything roles. So if you need somebody who's just going to support with admin, it's fine to have that, as long as you're making it really clear in the advert that the role is going to be varied and there might be a little bit of everything, but the volunteer is still aware of how what they are doing supports the cause. Thinking through an application process. So just thinking what the application process will look like, what the application process will be from the volunteer's perspective, how it's going to look for them, how when they first come into the organization, or when they first have contact with the organization, who will that contact be with, and how that will work. And then looking at the vetting and checks, so the kind of the logical next stage from that. So initially we have the application process. Beyond that, you then need to think about, actually, how do we go about taking somebody from there? So do you reference check? Do you have a DBS check? Do you need to do any kind of vetting at all? Or is it something that actually it's kind of, there's no barriers to entry? But again, thinking about who's responsible for that within the organization and the time that it will take, if there's any kind of expense associated with it and what that looks like. And then really, really key, support structure. So again, it's kind of often there's a kind of we need more people because we don't have enough resource. So you will be wanting to, in some instances, bring people in because you don't have capacity to do certain things. But what you do need to have is capacity to support the person that's going to be doing those things. So if you're bringing a volunteer in and you want them to deal with admin, to use the same example, who currently is doing that and can they support the person? Is there going to be ongoing training? What does the induction look like? Is there line management? Who's going to be responsible for problem solving or dealing with any kind of issues that come up? And most importantly, is it realistic? If you don't necessarily have the resource to give a great deal of support or ongoing training, that's obviously going to impact the kind of person that you're looking to employ and what skills they're bringing. But just make sure it's something that you've really considered and you've really thought about the realism of it. So if you have minimal resources, that's not a deal breaker, but it is something that you just need to make clear to the volunteer at the outset that it's going to be quite a self-directed offer.
And I think the main thing that Hannah was mentioning there is just, it might feel a bit overwhelming, and if this is the first time that you've ever thought about volunteering, then that's absolutely fine. But the thing that we would just encourage you to take away is just thinking about these things, and they don't have to be overly complicated, but just having the time to think and plan is almost the most important thing. You know, why do we want to work with volunteers? Is there a reason for it? And just thinking about through these processes will be really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Next slide. Okay, so when we talked about policies earlier and looking at kind of at the kind of the structure and the kind of the compliance side of things, the NCVO website is such a valuable resource. There are a huge amount of free resources on it, so you don't necessarily have to be a fully paid up member. There are lots and lots of templates for everything from policies to legal information and risk assessments. So before you start feeling that you have to create something, or before you invest too much time in creating anything bespoke, have a look and see if there are templates that you can adapt or something that you can download that does the job. It's just such a useful bank of resources, and there's pretty much everything that you would need to get going with working with volunteers can be found within the free tools and resources. If there's anything a little fancier you want, you may need to pay for it, but it's probably money well spent compared with having to create things from scratch. Okay, thank you, Dan.
Great. So we are going to get into the meat of the session today, but before we do that, we would just like to ask you, what do you think are people's motivations for volunteering? So if you want to pop those in the chat, take 30 seconds to think about what you think are people's motivations for volunteering, and then we'll have a quick look. Hopefully they'll match up to what we've got. Fingers crossed. I'm sure they were, but we'll just spend 30 seconds.
Yeah, some really good ones coming through.
Fantastic. Okay, so
Yeah, so there are lots of different reasons, and we used to say within Oxfam that there's around 20,000 different reasons. We've got 20,000 volunteers or thereabouts. There's 20,000 different reasons, and motivations might shift over time as well. So what drives somebody to join an organization or to start volunteering may not be the thing that keeps them there or the thing that motivates them down the line. So it's really important to kind of to constantly revisit, is the individual that's volunteering, is the individual that's giving their time to you, are their reasons for doing it being met? So we have a survey here. This is the Community Life Survey that was carried out. It's a government survey that was carried out kind of, I say post-pandemic, but it's actually kind of mid-pandemic, really. So it was 2020, 2021. So it's quite interesting because this is kind of one of the first kind of major studies that's looked at post-COVID volunteering. And obviously we know that there's kind of lots of sort of behavioural changes and the landscape's changed. But still, the number one thing that comes up, so with 50% of people, is I want to improve things or help people. So I saw that pop up lots in the chat box. So obviously that's something that people have got nailed. And I think we know ourselves that when we volunteer, that's often the driver, that we want to make a difference. We want to improve the world. There are also social drivers that come really high up the scale. There's a little bit later on about digital volunteering and the rise of remote volunteering, but it's really worth kind of balancing when we talk about that, just keeping in your mind that there are a number of really social drivers that always feature highly, which whenever the study is carried out and whichever study it is, you always tend to get those social motivations of, I wanted to meet people, make friends, my friends or family were involved in it. It was a cause that was close to my heart because of friends or family. So those kind of social motivations. You've also got things around cause, so being cause driven. So people who are drawn to a specific cause. And they're the ones, obviously, when it comes to volunteering, where you're pushing at an open door. If they're particularly drawn to your cause, then that's something that you can work well with. The reasons that we would say are perhaps the more or the less altruistic reasons actually feature quite low down. So it's kind of things where it gave me a chance to get a recognized qualification, or kind of the drivers that are perhaps more kind of career focused for the individual. Those things don't tend to feature very highly. We know that they are motivations for volunteering, and we know that they're not going to hurt if that's something that's on offer. It's certainly not going to detract from your volunteering offer, but it doesn't appear to be a primary motivator for people. Okay, Dan.
So what we want to do now is just to give you a little bit of context and some volunteer stats. So we're not going to spend loads of time on this, but I think it's helpful just to put into context where we were just before the pandemic to during the pandemic, and where we feel some of the trends are going post-pandemic, if we can even call it post-pandemic, the point in time where we are now. So this slide highlights where we were just before the pandemic. And I think it's helpful just to look back to see where we've come from over the last couple of years. And as we know, working in our sector, there are a few surprises in volunteering trends. However, these trends have seen a bit of a change in light of the pandemic. So usually there are very few fluctuations across gender, social grade, or whether the person is a donor or not. But by far the largest determinant factor affecting volunteering rates over the last decade or so has been age. So for those aged 55 and above, volunteering rates have dropped off by about 10% since 2018, with an average of 1 in 10 saying that they have volunteered in the last 3 months. And COVID played a large part of that. So over the last 2 years, if we think about vulnerable groups or older people who are self-isolating more strictly than others, then that's had an impact. Then with at points during various lockdowns and charities opening up again, that was also a natural pause for a lot of volunteers to stop volunteering and not coming back. However, volunteering rates amongst the under 30s have increased, and that percentage of people saying that they have volunteered has increased from about 30 to 40% between 2018 and 2020. And again, COVID would have played a part in that, with many people responding to the national volunteering schemes such as the NHS Corps for Volunteers, or other schemes such as local mutual aid groups. And I'm sure lots of people on the call today would have recognised those types of mutual aid groups. So helping out in the local community, going out to get prescriptions, helping to buy food for people, but wouldn't necessarily think or consider that as volunteering. That's just, I'm helping out because I want to do something good. None of this is necessarily that surprising, but what is perhaps is interesting is that the research suggests that COVID has just exacerbated an existing trend rather than restructure the whole landscape of volunteering. And the immediate downturn is no doubt due to COVID, but understanding the cause behind the longer term decline is somewhat more difficult, and could ultimately be based on a myriad of factors. One of those factors being people in that slightly older age bracket are part of this thing called the stretch generation. So where people are having to work longer, looking after elderly parents, take on childcare responsibilities such as looking after grandchildren. Therefore, their time is becoming more stretched and they're more focused as to how they can spend their free time. However, looking forward, amongst younger people, there is a bit more room for positivity, with youth volunteering rates generally on the incline over the past decade, and we're seeing a bit of a spike in that 16 to 24-year-old age group, saying that they are volunteering more, and this was a marked increase on previous years. And one of the factors around that is this piece around flexibility and volunteering for different organisations. So even though younger volunteers may be either volunteering the same amount of time or slightly increasing, what they are doing is far more cause-based. So volunteering for causes that are linked to them, and their motivations, as well as taking on opportunities which are accessible and easy to get involved with. So that's not to say that is the case for absolutely all younger people, or that there are no older people who want to volunteer, but I think it's helpful that we're a bit more informed. Stats on volunteering aren't as frequent as we would like. So when we do get research and data coming through, it's really important that we consider it and see where some of those trends are heading.
Thank you, Dan. So that leads neatly in to this. It looks like such a dry slide, but it's actually really interesting. So this is one of the surveys that's come out, or it's taken from a couple of surveys, actually, a community life one that was done in 2021, and a further education survey, and also some Birmingham University research. So to start with the Birmingham University research, it's identified that there is a civic core that is less than 1/3 of the adult population, which actually accounts for over 4/5 of all pro-social behaviours. So the vast majority of volunteers are found within that civic core, but also the vast majority of all pro-social behaviours. And that core is predominantly middle-aged, prosperous and well-educated. And then they tend to be overrepresented in prosperous areas. But looking at the kind of the national picture, the 17% of people had taken part in formal volunteering at least once a month in the past 12 months. So, I mean, that's huge, but it's lower than in 2019, 2020. And leaving aside anything to do with the pandemic and COVID, there's actually been a decline in numbers year on year for several years now of people taking part regularly in formal volunteering. It's difficult because people often don't identify what they are doing as volunteering. So it's again, in a survey such as this, where people are asked to say, have they taken part in formal volunteering at least once a month? They may not consider that what they are doing is volunteering, whereas perhaps we would. So again, it's looking at 17% of 16 to 24-year-olds are volunteering at least once a year. So that kind of very youngest age bracket are actually volunteering in the same proportions. It's, as Dan said, it did spike initially, and that it's been a group that's been on the increase for years, but it's kind of just recently fallen back to about the same levels as the rest of the population. Digital volunteering is hugely on the increase. So it's something that, again, it's the pandemic has given rise to it. It's something that probably would have happened eventually anyway, but I think the pandemic kind of forced the hand of lots of organisations to think about new ways of volunteering. Now, it's an interesting one because it is on the rise. It allows for volunteer roles to be carried out remotely, which means that if you're quite specific in the skills that you require, or if you're somewhere that's difficult to kind of to get to, or you don't have a permanent office space, it means that you can recruit much more widely. It leads to it gives you far more diversity in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, cultural background. So it's wonderful, but it needs to be balanced with that kind of the thinking about the kind of the social drivers and the reasons that people volunteer around wanting to meet new people. So if you have a role that is entirely remote and can be done from anywhere in the world, but just requires a specific skill set, it's making sure that you perhaps have either kind of spoken to the person beforehand to make sure that their drivers are not social, they're not hoping to volunteer because they want to make new friends if they're going to be sat in their own home volunteering completely remotely. And that you perhaps look at things that you can do around kind of support and buddying systems and things to give a sort of social element to it. But really, charities that are embracing digital volunteering, they're the ones that are seeing an increase in new volunteers from a diverse range of age and gender and cultural backgrounds. So they're the ones that are bucking the trend in the kind of the general decline in volunteering and looking at kind of really kind of improving numbers. The other thing to consider is skills-based volunteering. So lots of people, again, when we were talking earlier about the kind of the having a really clear offer, it's sometimes when you know that you need resource, you need people, and it's often kind of just presented as we just need more people, we just need more time. But actually it's thinking through and thinking, do you need skills? Because the survey done for further education found that 70% of charities need skilled volunteers or skilled-based volunteers, but only 40% are actually receiving it. So there's this huge gap between what is needed and what is being received. So it's worth thinking about the sort of skills-based volunteering and how you can improve that. It's also worth thinking about the kind of offer that you're making, because one of the biggest reasons that gets cited for leaving a volunteering role, aside from not feeling that they're making a difference, is time. So people are time poor. And those groups that Dan was talking about that are often historically have been our bread and butter for volunteers, are kind of the older demographics, the people who are kind of middle-aged, prosperous, well-educated, retired individuals. Those people are time squeezed, and there's so much now that they have on offer and that they can do. And there are so many different volunteering roles. So it's worth thinking, can you make offers short-term or project-based? Can you be flexible? Can you do micro-volunteering? Can you look at different ways of volunteering that perhaps fit more with people's lifestyles? And again, it broadens your appeal. If something is a kind of a 6-week offer to do a specific project for a charity, you will appeal to a totally different group of people than if you are asking for longer term or ongoing volunteers. Okay, so.
And it's really interesting what Hannah was saying there, and we're going to look at this slide again from NCVO around the varying types of volunteering, and we've put it in a bit of a context of COVID, but I think it's just helpful to see the different types of roles, and it contextualizes the differences in volunteering during the pandemic and then coming out of it as well. So in this first slide, you'll see the existing kind of specialist and spontaneous types of volunteering, with traditional methods such as engaging through volunteering centres to specialist roles in NHS volunteering schemes like the Royal Voluntary Service, and the spontaneous volunteering that's come through grassroots local schemes such as community volunteering. And then on the other slides on the right hand side, it displays us through a continuum from informal right up to formal, and both ends we have seen increases in volunteering, but what it demonstrates is flexibility and choice for people to self-select how they want to contribute and volunteer is really important. And this reflects on developing a volunteering plan. So we'll come on to that in a moment here, but people get involved and having the choice and the flexibility that Hannah mentioned. And one of those ways in which people can do that is through micro volunteering. And I do want to just touch on this very brief case study that has come out of the pandemic and is now continuing through as business as normal. And it's a micro volunteering offer by the RSPCA, and the insight that RSPCA have shared with me on their really successful micro volunteering offer. And one of the first things that they really wanted to consider was how they can engage people and change the dynamic in how they recruited and worked with volunteers. So micro volunteering are tasks that can be completed within 30 minutes to an hour. And rather than recruit micro volunteers for different tasks, they've recruited a bank of micro volunteers, and then the RSPCA pitch tasks to them, and then they can pick and choose those tasks. So it's a lot more equitable. That power dynamic of organisations telling you have to do it this way and there's no other way in which you can do it has slightly changed. So volunteers are able to self-select into roles and activities that they would find really interesting. And these types of roles have predominantly been around sharing social media posts, signing up and supporting campaigns, or submitting pictures to help the RSPCA with promotions, or events such as sharing a picture of you walking your dog, or looking after your cat, or something like that. And they currently have lots and lots of volunteers, so hundreds and hundreds of micro volunteers. But what they have found is that it's increased their diversity and inclusion enormously. So they've seen a rise in people who would come from non-traditional volunteering backgrounds. So as Hannah mentioned earlier, those in inverted commas, traditional volunteers, older people who come from affluent backgrounds. They've seen a rise in younger people volunteering. They've seen a rise of people coming from different backgrounds. They've seen a rise in people from LGBTQ plus backgrounds as well. So what's really helped, it's been far more accessible and inclusive. And because they provided a really great experience and have been more open and diverse, what they have found is that some of those people who joined as micro volunteers have then been converted to longer term volunteers, mainly due to the fact that they have had a wonderful experience. It's been very fulfilling, and they wanted to stay connected and be involved, so that then they have a pipeline of volunteers that they can then work with in the future. And I know I'm sharing a national charity who have lots of resource and capacity, but why it's relevant is the principles of engaging with new audiences is really helpful to share. And that piece around flexibility, being inclusive, and that power dynamic, I think will be really helpful when you're thinking and considering about what types of roles you want to recruit for in your team and in your organizations.
I just saw pop up in the chat, Dan, as well. I won't get drawn into doing lots of questions now, but I just saw somebody say in the chat, sorry, I'll paraphrase, but it was basically that it becomes counterproductive to be recruiting for people if they're going to leave after just a few weeks. Absolutely, if actually what you're recruiting for is a longer term volunteer, but if you have a specific task that you want doing, if you have something that's quite small, specific, and will have a start and an end point, whether that's creating a policy or setting up a social media account or improving the website, whatever that looks like. If it's something that you think, okay, if I had a person with the right skills, they could probably get that done in a few hours a week over a few weeks, and then their job would be done, and it would need minimal input from you, minimal training. They don't need to understand everything about how the charity works. It doesn't need necessarily the full works induction wise. They just need to understand what is being asked of them, and that's a sort of magnified up version of this micro volunteering. But absolutely, I mean, for the vast majority of volunteers, you will want them to stay because you've invested that time in recruitment and training and induction. But it's also worth thinking if there are things that you can do with your charity, or things that you can offer that hook people in the way that the RSPCA are doing, and they may well become longer term volunteers, but at very least you have the task done that you need doing.
That's really helpful, Hannah. Thank you. What we're going to do now, we're going to move on to some practical bits and pieces and some information. So we've set some of that context, and at its most basic level, this is what volunteering is all about: mutuality of benefit. So as a charity and an organisation, you're able to benefit from the contribution of volunteers, so through their time and expertise, and volunteers are able to benefit by having new experiences, learning new skills, and seeing the impact of their contribution. But there does need to be equity in that volunteering opportunity. So if that seesaw goes too much in either direction, then that can lead to a poor volunteering opportunity. So always be mindful about setting those expectations. What is the role, how you're able to support the volunteer, and what the volunteer is going to get out of that experience. So we're going to fire through some of these next slides, because I'm conscious of making sure we get through all this content. So Hannah's going to take us through the first part here.
Okay, so when you're recruiting, so there's just a few things to think about with recruitment, and one of the things that we've touched upon previously is around kind of the are you recruiting for times or skills or both? So if you're recruiting and it's purely time based, there's no real skills required. It just, so say for example, you're running an event and you need kind of 10 people that will fundraise on the day or steward on the day. So perhaps the requirement is simply that they are kind of available within the certain window. You have plenty of people around to supervise them, so they don't need to be able to work independently or have any kind of experience. That would be an example perhaps of where you are simply recruiting for time and the skills is less important. The vast majority of the time, however, you will need an element of skill, whether that's the ability to work independently. It might be having Microsoft Office skills. It might be a basic amount of experience in cash handling or something. So again, it's worth really thinking about what you are asking. And it's really important that when you write that recruitment advert and when you write that volunteer role profile, that you are specific about the skills that you require, if you do require any skills at all. And a bit more on that later. Where to try? Oh, there's so many. It's such a rich tapestry of national places that you can try and online, as well as the usual kind of community places. And it will really depend whereabouts you're based, what kind of community presence you have, what kind of contacts you have, and what kind of offer you're making or what you're looking for from your volunteers. So if you're looking for something really skills-based, when we were giving the examples about micro-volunteering, if you wanted a policy written, or if you wanted your website updating, Reach volunteering is amazing for that. It's specifically just for skills-based volunteers, and they will take down any adverts that aren't particular skill-based volunteers. You can't just ask for time on Reach. Charity job is great. It's better for kind of larger towns and cities, but it's really useful. And again, it gives you a good internet presence. Your offer is out there. Indeed, although it's predominantly for jobs and paid employment, Indeed also has a volunteering section. Do it, local community pages, newsletters, free post. If you have social media, use social media. If you don't have social media, consider getting social media. Your existing networks, corporate contacts, community groups around you. Think about who you're targeting, though. So when you're making these kind of approaches to different places or different websites, think about who you are looking for. So if you're looking for somebody who has specific skills in, say, finance, is there a local university course in accounting where people are going to be perhaps skills rich, but perhaps lacking experience and looking to build that experience? So there's a real mutuality of benefit is there, as Dan was saying, because that mutuality of benefit, it's like the easiest diagram ever, but it's so hard to get that right. If you can target people who you feel immediately there is something in the offer for them that's a real tangible good thing for them, that's a winner. And also consider budget. So there's an absolute, you do not ever need to pay for recruitment for volunteers. It's never a necessity. There's a plethora of free options, and almost everything where there is a paid way of advertising will also have a free counterpart. In my experience, there's not a huge amount of difference in return on what, if you pay for it, the return on investment is not necessarily much better than the free offer. I don't think I'd necessarily pay to start with, but it's worth thinking about, especially if you have local community magazines and things. But also consider that sometimes perhaps a paid advert in the local press for a volunteer would cost you, whereas some editorial, a good news story about your charity or a great story about what a volunteer's done, that would be free. So it's worth thinking, is there a free way of doing this?
Absolutely. And also just to build on what Hannah was saying there, word of mouth is so important. And again, we're mindful of maybe the size of your charity and your organization. So but if you are in a position where you have a group of volunteers who are volunteering for you. They are your advocates, they are your ambassadors, and word of mouth again is such a crucial part of recruitment when you're in that position to do so. And we would always give the example of if a new restaurant was to open in your town and you went there and you had a really poor experience and the food was rubbish and overpriced, that you would go and you tell all your friends and family, don't go there to that restaurant, it's awful. But if you went there and you had a fantastic experience, you had a wonderful time, you tell as many people as possible to make sure you go and have an evening meal there. And there's no different in volunteering. If you're providing a really meaningful experience, the volunteers are seeing the impact of their contribution, they're enjoying themselves, they're having fun, then they're more likely to tell other people what a great organisation it is to volunteer for. Similarly, if they're having a really poor experience, they're not supported, they've not had a good induction, they're left to their own devices without any oversight or support, then they're going to tell people. And that principle of good word of mouth is really important when it comes to volunteer recruitment.
And it is challenging when the resource isn't there. If you're a very small organisation and you simply don't have the resource, that is a huge hurdle to overcome. But I would say if you can find the resource to recruit one volunteer who has a good experience, and that one volunteer has within their remit that they will support a new volunteer that comes in, it can grow fairly organically. It doesn't need to be you go from nothing to having sort of 30 volunteers. I think a far better way of doing it would be to kind of have a volunteer that comes in who perhaps recruit a volunteer recruiter to start with. So your first person is HR support and recruitment support, and that's your volunteer support going forward, is when you are looking for volunteers, when you're looking to create adverts or do recruitment, that you have someone who volunteers for you that does that. It's but it is difficult with a complete lack of resource. I completely acknowledge that. And so looking on to the next slide, Dan, do you want to?
Yeah, so it's having a recruitment plan, and this sounds really basic and super simple, but it's meant to be. And having a plan, and it might seem quite obvious, but spending time to think about how you want to go about recruiting volunteers is crucial. By having a plan, it gives you structure and direction to what you want to achieve and how you're going to go about achieving it. So after today, we'll be providing some templates, with this being one of those, but taking the time just to write down and plan out your activities will give you that structure, but also that momentum to go out and recruit your volunteers. So this will include specific tasks such as speaking to your local volunteering centre or advertising online. Who is doing the activity? So you may have staff, or you might have helpers or family members who might be able to support you in this. Putting in a deadline as to when you're going to do the activity, whether you need support to achieve this. So that might be taking advice from another charity, for example. And finally, what was the outcome of that activity? Was it successful? What would you do differently next time? And this plan, should be thought of as a live document. So it's something that can be added to over time and not just viewed in isolation. And as Hannah mentioned, when you're then in a position, if you have a volunteer who can take on some of these activities, you can give them that recruitment plan, and then they can learn and adapt and add to it. And linked to that then is a contact list. And again, it might sound really basic and very simple, but this stuff does work. Having a contact list of all the organisations that you've spoken to, or whoever you got in contact with, or where you've advertised, it's really helpful just to keep this up to date so that you know what works, what doesn't work. And actually, if something doesn't work out once, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work out again in the future. So having a black book of organisations that you got in touch with and contacted is really helpful best practice. And then thinking about those types of roles. So we talked a bit about time before, and your own time, and where you should prioritize in spending your efforts in recruiting volunteers. This is another helpful exercise that we've worked on for many years when we've been doing training with individual teams, and developing a plan can sometimes feel a bit daunting. If you've ever been asked to go and write a strategy, then you think, blimey, where do I start? What do I need to do? But all we're doing is taking a step back and thinking about what we want to do and how we're going to do it. And developing this simple exercise is an effective starting point. So what it does, it identifies where you're spending a lot of your time, and it helps you to recognize what tasks you're currently working on that can either be delegated or you recruit a volunteer to help and support you. And it may sound simple, but spending the time to write down where you want to spend your time. So if you want to spend more of your time speaking to corporate partners, for example, what do you need to give up and delegate or recruit a volunteer for to enable you to be able to do that? So in that center circle, that's where you would want to think a bit strategically about your time. And then on the orange circle, listing all the things that you're currently doing, and those are the things that you might want to think and consider about. Could you delegate that to either another member of your team, or can you recruit a volunteer to take on that role? So if you're thinking about, I wish I had more time to spend on strategic partnerships, but I don't have enough time to do the social media as well, do I need to recruit a social media volunteer to help run and manage that for me? So again, it's a helpful exercise to think and consider, but it's also a really good starting point.
And if you have a kind of a complete lack of resource, you are kind of so stretched that you'll have that kind of that mental list that's probably endlessly frustrating of the things that you could do if you only had the time. And so it's worth thinking, if they're things that are well within your kind of your skill set and your capability, you would love to be able to do those. What can you get rid of from your current workload? If you're spending a lot of time doing basic admin or spending lots of time doing accounting, and actually that's not something that is your skill set, or that's kind of outside of your comfort zone, can you recruit volunteers to do that so that you can spend more time doing the things that you could potentially do if only you didn't have the kind of the day-to-day tasks?
And now linked to that is thinking, so you've figured out, maybe if you want a social media volunteer, let's have that as an example, how to write an effective role profile or a volunteer advert. And again, developing a role profile, role description will help you recruit for some of those specific roles and areas that you've identified. And what it would do, enable potential volunteers to understand more about the tasks that are involved. So the level of commitment and the skills and qualities you're looking for in a volunteer. And the role description forms a key part in that recruitment process. Even if you're doing something like micro volunteering, if we go back a couple of slides previously, even in a micro volunteering role profile, they set out the tasks and what would be involved. And what you're doing is setting out the expectations. And again, not trying to kind of be too basic here, but actually getting this stuff right, getting the basics right, will really help you in your volunteer recruitment. So valuing writing a really good volunteer advert or a really good volunteer role description will put you in really good foundations for going ahead and actually having a successful volunteer recruitment campaign. If you don't do this stuff right and you don't write an effective volunteer advert, then it does make it more difficult to recruit successfully into that role. So, just in things to look out for, keep it simple and clearly communicate why the role is important. Avoid using jargon, as this can be a barrier to potential volunteers. Explain the tasks and responsibilities that will involve. Volunteer roles are not jobs, and so the description shouldn't look like a job description, and language is really important. Setting those expectations up front as well. So if you're looking for something specific, ensure that it's included in the role description, and this ensures that you and the volunteer are both clear about what is involved. So there will be a blank volunteer advert role profile for you to go away and have a go at completing. Something that we've always advocated as a good way just to do this is write it in 15 minutes, see how far you get. You'd be really surprised when you put a time limit on something, how much you achieve in that time limit. So have a go, 15 minutes, identify what you want, write a role profile, then you can go ahead and refine it afterwards.
Okay, so but within the role profile, it's really important that you are clear and specific, but you don't missell. So the amount of times I've seen within Oxfam, to coin the example that I've been working within, somebody advertising for something along the lines of a marketing volunteer, where they may have the opportunity to like make a poster once, but the rest of the time they're going to be on the till in a shop. It's really important that in kind of trying to fashion an appealing sounding volunteering role, that you're actually realistic about what they're going to be doing. So if it's going to be predominantly kind of admin support, then that's absolutely fine, but make sure it's billed as that. Don't sell it as kind of that it's going to be kind of something that it's not. It's also really important that you kind of consider use of language around equality, diversity, and inclusion. So don't use phrases, and it's something that we'll all have seen in job adverts, where somebody's asking for someone who is energetic or upbeat. It's things that will potentially be off-putting to people, or to make people feel that's not for me. You want it to be as broad as possible. That said, if the role genuinely has requirements, so if you're looking for a volunteer van driver who's going to be potentially moving furniture, you are fair to say that you need somebody who is physically fit and has a full driving license and is able to move furniture. It's thinking about the role, and is the description fair for what the role actually requires? Don't use jargon. It's something that I think probably smaller charities are much better at than larger organizations, but it's a constant battle within larger charities to avoid jargon, acronyms, things that we understand. And I mean, even within this, we're talking about role profiles when perhaps we should say adverts, because it's clearer. But it's thinking through, does this read well to somebody who has no experience of my charity? The benefits, so making it really clear both what the benefits are to the person within the advert and what the benefits are to the organisation. So that mutuality of benefit is spelt out from the very, very early stages. And also what the expectations are. So what the person can expect from the organisation, so whether that's ongoing training and support, or if there's any kind of equipment that comes with the role. So if you'll be provided with a mobile phone for something, or anything that is provided or anything that is expected, that needs to be in there too. Just so that the volunteer is clear from the start whether or not they meet the criteria and what they can expect from you going forward. So if there's not going to be lots of support, if you don't have the facility to give ongoing training and support, if it's going to be a relatively self-starting role where there'll be an initial induction, but then from there on in they'll be working quite independently, that's the place to say it, so that they know upfront that that is what they're getting. And then you'll hopefully, it's equality, diversity and inclusion. So it's, yeah.
We've fallen foul of our own advice here by not using acronyms.
I've got an acronym in a bit where I'm talking about not using an acronym. That's a brilliant fail. The other thing is to consider corporates. So often when we're thinking about volunteers, we're thinking about individuals and recruiting one person for this and one person for that maybe. Corporates, the vast majority of corporates will have a corporate social responsibility person whose job it is to make sure that the employees are engaged with the local community, that they have an opportunity to volunteer. They may do charity of the years and things like that. If you can get in with a local corporate, if there's any links that you have, or any anything that you can do to form a partnership with a local organisation, volunteering can also come through that. And that's a really good basis for skilled volunteering as well. So if you have a relationship with a local accountancy firm, you need never do your own books again, for example. So again, it's worth thinking, are you going to recruit individuals, or actually is this something that could come from a local business?
And it's really surprising how much local businesses and organizations are willing to support you. So most organizations would give up 3 days volunteering a year for their staff to go out and do something in the local community. Forging those links is a really helpful way to get some of those skill-based volunteering roles that you might require. Also just setting up those links and having that network and those relationships will only be beneficial. We've got a couple of role profiles. What I would suggest, because we've got some more content to get through, is when you go back through the webinar, you can pause these and just read them through. So we've got 4 different roles, a couple from charity job, and then 2 from reach volunteering. And again, just highlighting the types of skill-based roles that reach volunteering would have. So this is an administrative volunteer, and this is a human resources volunteer. Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, it's good to know your competition and to know what other people are looking for, and also to kind of to utilize it. It's something that you might not realize that you could have a volunteer for until you see somebody else recruiting a volunteer for it. A really good thing to do as well before you start recruiting, or after you've started recruiting, when you've sort of maybe placed a couple of adverts, or you're investigating what other people are doing locally, is look at how you look in comparison. So review your own online presence. So if you Google volunteering and then wherever you're based, so your town, your city, your location, what comes up? Do you come up on the first page, or are you kind of 18 pages in, so that people would have to actively be seeking you out? And think about how you can improve that. So if it's not great, if actually somebody speculatively looking to volunteer in your town or city would have to really be actively trying to seek you out, how can you improve that? How can you make that online presence more? Social media is one really key way. So an active kind of Twitter or Facebook account. And again, that's something that you can ask a volunteer to do. And it's a nice kind of remote micro volunteering activity where somebody can post regularly. And you just kind of keep an eye and make sure everything's exactly as you would want it to be. Online adverts, Indeed, Charity Job, Reach, anything like that will pull through to search engines. So anything where you've got an online advert and you're asking for volunteers, that will also pull through, and that will be something that shows. Local press is great as well. So if you have any kind of stories, anything at all that the local press might be interested in, you're changing premises, you've hired a new person, you have a new office cat, anything that's got the slightest hint of an editorial story. It's much better if you're not based in a large place, because you'll probably get more traction with the local press. But if you can get a volunteering ask into that too, and then again, you have that web presence, people browsing will see you. It's all about trying to make it so that it's not just people that are specifically looking for you that see you, but also those sort of speculative searchers. And make sure that if you do have any social media accounts, that unlike your own private ones, just make sure that they're set to public so that everything does pull through. And just keep things refreshed, because things like Indeed, if you don't have the advert if you take it down and put it up again every couple of weeks, it just keeps you up the search rankings and also up Indeed's own internal.
And again, just off the back of that, then it's thinking about how you're going to respond back to volunteers. So if you can't always, that's okay, but as long as you make it clear in the adverts about what that time frame is going to be, it's really important then to think about that's going to be the potential volunteer's first experience of interacting with you. So you can set up an auto reply from an inbox that you're using. And again, you're just setting up those expectations as to when volunteers can expect to hear back, when they will, and what does that process look like. So who's going to take responsibility for replying? Is that something that you're going to do, or can you delegate that to someone else? And then very briefly, a bit of light and shade, but how to say no to someone.
How to say no, yeah. So not everyone that applies will be suitable. And if you have specific skill sets, that gives you an ability to then have a selection process. So if you've advertised a role and it is literally just, are you free on a Tuesday afternoon? You really do have to be prepared to take anybody who applies who is free on a Tuesday afternoon, irrespective of how much support that they need, whether or not they have the skills that you require, whether or not they have the background that you need ideally. So really think about having, even if it's fairly low level skill sets, like that they must be able to work independently or must have basic PC skills. So just so that you really can, if somebody applies who isn't suitable, that you can say no. It's also worth thinking about if somebody applies and they're not suitable for a particular role, but they're clearly interested in your charity. Do you have anything else internally that they could do? Yeah, it's also being realistic about what the role requires. So if you need somebody who's able to, if it's an event and you need somebody that's able to stand for a long time or something, make sure that things like that are really clear in the job specification. If you can make any adjustments, or if you can offer training, perfect. You want to be as inclusive and as accommodating as you can be, but that's only obviously going to be something that you can do to such an extent. It's not going to be something that's always appropriate. So if somebody has never used a PC before and they're applying to be your admin person, that is probably going to be a massive stretch on your resources to be training someone from scratch. it's going to need a sort of a certain baseline for entry. But yeah, just make that really clear on the the actual job advert, and it will make it much, much easier to say no if you need to.
And then, you know, when you're getting to your recruitment phase, what does that look like? So I won't go through this verbatim. You can then look back and read them in more detail, but just having that process. So that first impression, that meeting, greeting, that potential volunteer, when you are having an initial chat or when you're interviewing them, what does that look like? Explaining what the volunteer role is, what's involved in the volunteer role and its importance in the work that you're doing, and then again sharing anything to do with training and support, asking about the volunteer. So why do they want to volunteer? What are they hoping to get out of volunteering? What's their motivation? What do they know about the charity? Are there any specific skills and experience that they want to learn or that they can bring, and anything they want to ask about the role? Anything from the volunteer side. Admin, so making sure that if you are doing things like if you need to do like an ID check, or if the role does need to have a DBS check, for example, if the role is working with young people or vulnerable adults, making sure that you have those processes in place. And what are those next steps? So what's going to happen afterwards? And again, very similar to a paid staff role, but actually valuing this process and making sure that you are telling volunteers what's going to happen, what does that look like, and when are they going to know and find out about the role. And if your particular, if you need to take references, we're going to include a very basic reference template for you to use and adapt. But it is important that there is some kind of vetting at an appropriate level for the role, and roles where an individual will be supervising younger people will need to have more rigorous vetting processes than people who don't necessarily be undertaking those types of roles. But it is, again, going back to the very start, it's just thinking about these things.
Absolutely. So,
and then again, we'll just mention that we'll share these afterwards for you. Sorry, back to you.
Absolutely.
And then finally, sorry, it's back to me. Seamless, as you can tell. Just to finish up on recruitment, we've always thought of some pithy takeaways. So the 5 golden rules of recruitment. So that is, again, starting with your network, really going out to all of your connections. Is there anyone there that you could approach, make aware, support you when you're going through that recruitment journey? Having a plan. Recruitment can be challenging, and it's important to have a plan so that you can look back on, as well as keeping you focused. Getting into your local community, and that local community can be that physical local community, or it could be your online community as well. With the types of organisations that I know that you folks are, you might not be based locally, you could have that national reach. So it is important to think about your local online community, your beneficiaries, maybe parents who you interact with, your people who use your services. That is your community. Asking for help, there's lots of people who can help and support you. Organisations that we've highlighted, we would really encourage you to use the services that NCVO have. And finally, don't give up. Recruiting volunteers can be really hit and miss sometimes, and it's really important just to mention that you could put out the best adverts that you've ever put out and not get any traction. You tweak them, you change them, you advertise them 2 weeks later, and Bob's your uncle, you could have loads of people applying for that particular role. So persistence is really, really key when we're talking about recruitment.
absolutely. So do you want me to start on induction, Dan?
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. So again, induction, we've laid it out in the kind of the stages that it has, but it's something that actually it's going to be very, very dependent on what the role is. So we've got the first contact, followed by an interview or first chat, followed by maybe a 4 to 6 week induction. Welcome, they've finished. So they've finished their induction, they're a fully fledged volunteer, and then from there on in, it's just regular catch-ups and checking in, making sure that motivation is still being met. In reality, So thinking about how it actually looks in practice, it might be, if you have an events volunteer and it's a one-off event, that first contact and first chat might be merged. So you kind of, you ask somebody, you contact somebody and you say, would you like to pop in and we'll have a quick chat about what the role involves, and go from there. You talk through the date that you require people, what they're going to be doing, how it's all going to work. They maybe then come in, instead of the 4 to 6 week induction, it might be them coming back in to your organisation, maybe to do some health and safety training, to perhaps do a quick kind of induction of kind of who's going to be there on the day to support them, where they're going to need to go, what time they need to be there, those kinds of things. And then you've got the on the day thing, and then the regular catch up would just be maybe staying in contact with that person for future events. So it doesn't always need to look like that. If you have an admin volunteer, again, it kind of, you may do the interview. The 4 to 6 week induction might be that you have a buddy system for a few weeks. If they're coming in and they're incredibly highly qualified and skilled, again, that may not be necessary, but it's more just making sure that that support is available for that period of time, so that however skilled somebody is, however kind of qualified for the role they are, they still are aware that there is the support there, and that induction finishes, and then the catch-up opportunities remain regular.
And what this looks like in a more, in my brain, my process-driven brain, this flow chart, again, it's not meant to be overwhelming, but it's just documenting what that process looks like from the very start. And that question, do we need to recruit a volunteer? Because you might not need to recruit a volunteer. What you might need to recruit for is a freelancer or a paid member of staff. And some of those differences around business critical work. So it's really important thinking about if a volunteer is solely responsible for something which is business critical for your organization, that doesn't feel like a voluntary role. That feels like you should have a paid member of staff who's accountable for that. But if you do need to recruit a volunteer, that's your starting point. And then going through this process. And again, feel free then to go back after the webinar and pause it and just looking through that process. But it doesn't need to be very long, but it's just thinking about what you're doing when you're doing it and what's the next stage of that induction program. Because having a worthwhile and meaningful induction, volunteers who leave during those kind of first couple of weeks, those first 4 weeks, and that's mainly due to the quality of their induction. If you're providing a poor induction, if you're not giving that support, that level of contact, that coaching, then they're more likely to leave. So investing in providing a worthwhile and meaningful induction is really important. But also, you don't have to do all of this. You can delegate this to some of your team. If you have staff members or other helpers to support you, feel free to delegate those tasks. And then Hannah's favorite subject, compliance, which we're gonna whiz through this because we want to maintain that engagement still, Hannah, with everyone on the call today.
Yeah, that's fine. So compliance is key. You do have to think about it, and not just in a kind of catastrophizing way, but just thinking from the volunteer's safety point of view. What training is in place? What training needs to be in place? Risk assessing, so making sure that you've kind of just spoken to the person about their own capabilities. Do they need any adjustments making to the role? If it's going to be standing for a while, do they need a chair? Do they need access to bathrooms? Do all of the things that you would need to go through, and just making sure that you've risk assessed the individual thoroughly and you've risk assessed the environment. Health and safety side of things, again, is there adequate health and safety training? If, as we were saying earlier, you're recruiting for that van driver who's going to be lifting furniture, have you covered off safe lifting? And safeguarding, really, really important. There's obviously been a huge focus within Oxfam on this in the last few years, and it's making sure that things are covered off. Like if you have young people volunteering for you, do the adults supervising them have a DBS check? Has there been sufficient training to make sure those young people are safe, and are they covered via insurance and things like that? Making sure that volunteers of mandatory school age have a work permit, which is just something that comes from the local council. So the local council will do that with the actual employer rather than with the child. But just all of these are just things to think through, and they won't be applicable for every role. And some roles will require a much heavier risk assessment or much more training. But it's just, again, it's just having them in your mind and being aware of them. And when things go wrong, so or when things don't go as planned. So when we were talking earlier about that some people might leave after a few weeks, and that's an absolute, it feels like such a waste of your resources if you've invested the time in recruitment, training, inducting. It may be that the role doesn't meet their expectations, the circumstances may change, it may be that there's nothing that you can do, and it may be that there's lots you can do. So if it's something that it hasn't met their expectations because their driver, they're kind of their motivator, so they wanted it to be social, they wanted to meet people, and they're doing something remote, is there something that you can have them do that actually does meet that driver? Is there some way that they can just flex what they're doing within the organization to make it better fit them? So it may be that they don't have time and you can just be more flexible around when they're doing the volunteering. If their circumstances have changed, is there something that they can do remotely? Sometimes though, it's just there's a fundamental mismatch between what the volunteer can or will offer and what is actually needed. And if you can end the relationship well, it enables both parties to find something more suitable. So that's always the way to frame it, is that it's mutuality of benefit, that you want the individual to find something that more meets what they can do. So it's that really clear job description at the start. So the really clear role profile of what the volunteer is going to be doing, setting out the expectations at induction and making sure that they're really clear. It hopefully minimizes the amounts of times that you'll need to think about this, where there's been that mismatch, because hopefully everything's been so clear to the volunteer that they know exactly what's going to be expected. You know what you can expect from them. They know what they can expect from you. And it will minimize all of this. But also consider how, when things go very wrong, how you resolve any kind of grievance or disciplinary, and make sure that the process is fair and balanced and transparent. And also leavers. So not all people leave just because of something hideous. If people are leaving you to go back to college, or because it's the end of a fixed term placement with you, how are you going to manage that? How will you provide a reference, or will you provide a reference? And how long are you going to retain the volunteer records for? Okay.
And last but by no means least, recognition, which we are just going to go through very briefly. And again, just going back to induction very quickly, when a volunteer's finished their induction, it should be a time for a celebration when they're fully onboarded as a volunteer. They've completed all their training. They're now a fully fledged volunteer in your charity, and then thinking about continuing that momentum and building those strong foundations. And something that we always want to think about is that induction is part of your retention strategy. So one of the reasons why new volunteers can leave not long after it is again down to that quality of the induction. So if they are having a fulfilling and supported induction, they're much more likely to stay, which then really goes into your retention strategy. And it's just some of the basics, but demonstrating your appreciation for your volunteers and recognizing the contribution they make is really important. You want volunteers to enjoy the experience and know that their time is greatly appreciated. We all like our achievements to be acknowledged. We can all probably think back to times in our career when we've had fantastic line managers who've really embraced and celebrated us, and equally think back to times when we've had line managers who haven't done that, and that can be really demotivating and morale sapping. So saying thank you and recognizing your volunteers by keeping them motivated will add huge amount of value, as well as just being a good person by making your volunteers feel included. And again, what we were mentioning before, volunteers are your ambassadors for your charity. They will talk to their friends and their family about their experience that they are having, and so it's important that we are being appreciative of all of their support.
And one other thing that's a sort of a little less spoken method of recognition is the reminding the volunteers what they are bringing to the cause. So making it clear the difference that they are making. So if you've been able to do a particular thing simply because you had a couple of volunteers to help you, making sure that they're aware that couldn't have happened without them is that's a really powerful motivator and a really good way of making them feel recognized and integral.
Next week is the start of Volunteers Week from the 1st of June. So a happy coincidence. A really good opportunity to, if you work with volunteers already, to share their stories. It's also a good opportunity then to try and recruit new volunteers by the kind of natural goodwill around volunteering at this time of the year. And so going back to kind of sharing volunteer stories, using the power of social media to gain that experience and that insight, to connect your volunteers and your charity to the wider community is really, really important. And then finally, to kind of sum up again.
So retention and recruitment and recognition and induction, they're also interlinked. It's easy to think of them and we can talk about them in isolation, but actually doing one well links to then doing the next thing well, links to doing the next thing well. And the foundations that you build at the start with the induction will really, really support the retention, as will ongoing recognition. And that in turn supports recruitment, because if you do need to recruit, your word of mouth will really support any kind of formal advertising that you're doing. And you'll also be building the skills within your volunteer team to support new volunteers. So instead of having a kind of revolving door of recruitment where your people are leaving quite quickly and you never really build up that really engaged base of skilled volunteers, doing the induction, the recognition, leading to having really strong retention of your volunteers will enable you to hopefully do less recruitment. And when you do the recruitment, you will be able to be supported by your existing team.
So that's enough from us. We've spoken for far too long now, but we hope you enjoyed it. We hope that there's some takeaways for you off our talk today. And I think we're going to take a couple of questions now, Hannah's, sorry, from the audience. But thank you very much for listening, and we do hope it was useful.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Dan and Hannah. I thought the content was really great and really interesting. We have had quite a good amount of questions come through, so I'll probably just take a couple now, then we'll go to Vesna, and then don't worry, guys, we will have a good amount of time for questions at the end. So I'm going to go back to one of the ones at the start, and you kind of covered this a little bit, but so I'd be grateful if you could cover how to judge whether a task is better carried out by volunteers versus paid/freelance staff. And then we kind of had a linking question to this. So I know you talked about stuff like being business critical, but there's another one that's like, many of us are volunteer organizations, so volunteers do all the business critical work, and that's one of their biggest challenges. So I'm not sure if you had anything you could kind of expand on that point.
Okay, Dan, do you want to take this, or shall I?
You go ahead, and I'll add whatever wisdom I have left, which is probably not much, if you'll cover it all.
If you are an organisation that's entirely volunteer run, firstly, well done, because that's a huge undertaking, and to be covering everything and all of the different skills that need to be brought to that, and all of the different specialisms. I think within Oxfam, we say that everything can be done by volunteers. So everything that can be done by staff can be done by volunteers. So there is an element of, as Dan was saying, that if a role is business critical, consider whether or not it needs to be an employee. But if you don't have that luxury because you are working as a volunteer organisation, then that's fine. Something like Reach will be a really good friend to you. So using something like Reach volunteering, where you can specifically ask for certain skills, you can look for, if you're really comfortable with the dealing with people, the marketing, the publicity side of things, but actually the financial side of things is something that's just a continual headache. In most organizations, managing the finances would be something that would be done by a paid member of staff, because it would be classed as business critical. But actually, if that's something that you're currently doing yourself and it's not within your skill set, or it's not something you're hugely at ease with, that's something that you can recruit someone through Reach, and you will get somebody who's professionally qualified and probably far more at ease with that role than you. It's also a great place for things like trustees. So if you're looking for trustees within an organisation, that's useful. It is going to depend hugely. So, and somebody just put, our charity wouldn't be able to afford any paid staff, so have no choice. Absolutely. So if the decision is taken out of your hands and it's volunteers or nothing, then this is the idea of it being business critical and paid staff having to be brought in is a moot point.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, something else to consider would be sharing that role out. So diluting that role amongst other volunteers, so that you don't have one person who is absolutely ultimately responsible for one thing, and if for whatever reason they're poorly or they decide to stop volunteering, the whole operation stops. So when we think about business critical, it's those types of instances we're really thinking about. So a solution would be to share that responsibility amongst maybe 2 or 3 volunteers, if you're able to. I mean, that is the ultimate goal. But if you're not, then absolutely fine. But if you can share it amongst others, then that again is really helpful. So that if a volunteer is just off on holiday for a couple of weeks, then someone else is there to support and pick up that work.
And the specific skills, when you're really narrow with what you ask for, you would think that you would reduce so far how many people you're going to get responding as to make it almost not worth advertising. So if what you're looking for is really, really niche, but what you actually find is you tend to get, although you do get fewer, you get really, really good quality applicants, because the more kind of specific you're being in your ask, the more somebody will feel like it's speaking personally to them. So you don't get that kind of diffusion of responsibility that you get when you're doing quite a general ad, where everyone feels like anyone could do that, somebody else will do it, I don't have the time. If it's really quite niche and you're looking for a particular skill set, and somebody feels that that speaks to them, that actually works really, really well. It's quite a powerful recruitment method.
Great, thanks, guys. I think I have time for just one more quick one. And then someone said that they find listing hours difficult. So have you asked volunteers to keep track of the time they've invested? So I guess this is when you're creating a profile. Vesna, I'm not sure if you've got.
Sorry, I missed part of the...
No, it's about keeping time. We actually have timesheets in IGA, but we've had timesheets for a long time now, because we've used it for the board members, because we realized that when we do our finances, we show, what we get as money from pharma companies, from private companies or whatever, but we didn't show the actually the contribution of people in our finances. So we decided, let's do that. But we started with the board members first, and our paid staff, because our paid staff are also volunteers, which is amazing. And we fill in timesheets once a month. And all of that time actually gathers up, and it goes into our finances, and it shows that, you have, I don't know, this much hours, and that's worth this much money. So it shows the commitment of people volunteering, and people are, they say, oh, I've contributed to that. And it's amazing. It's good to do that. Sometimes it's difficult. So some volunteers don't want to do the timesheets, and it happens. So I usually, when I have a call with them, I tell them, you know what, you don't have to be specific about your hours and what did you do. Just say that this month you probably spent around 3 hours doing IGA work, and that would be fine. We don't need the specifics. And then they do that, and they feel more comfortable with that, because you tell them that they can do that too. So, and timesheet can be complicated, but it can also be very simple. So,
and just looking in the chat there as well, I was going to suggest using Toggle, a really helpful tool to use if you do want to track and record that time. Toggle is a really good tool to use, especially if you're doing any type of remote volunteering as well.
Yeah, just have in mind that not a lot of people actually use all the technology.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think best to get on with Vesna's presentation now to make sure we get through that. But we will have time for some more questions at the end. So yeah, Vesna, I'll hand it over to you.
Ooh, thank you. Well, I wanted to start with the presentations, but after hearing everything, I wanted to start with this picture because this is me and a lot of my volunteers, not all of them, because I have 43, so this is just part of them. And they were able, they got grants to be present at the International Gaucher Alliance Biennale member organizations meeting. So this was the first meeting we've had after the COVID years, and we decided that we found money to actually get our volunteers to be present at our meeting, to meet with member organizations, with patients and families, and to actually feel part of our community and be acknowledged. We didn't have a lot of money for gifts, but we did have these backpacks with our logo on, so this is what we shared with them at the meeting. But after this meeting, I have to tell you that they were all even more enthusiastic and wanted to do even more work, more projects for us, which is something you need to think about. This is part of the recognition process. You ended with recognition. I'm starting with that. Okay, now we'll stop sharing this screen and start the presentation screen. Okay. So I was actually very happy to see that when I was listening to Daniel and Hannah presenting, I was thinking, oh my God, I was doing the same things when I was developing the volunteer program for the International Gaucher Alliance. Me, myself, I started volunteering when I was 14 years old, and I started with the environment organization. Now I'm 37 and I'm still volunteering, although there are no people in my family that are volunteers. So I actually just wanted to be involved in something when I was young, and then I couldn't stop being involved. I thought, I have to be involved in something, and it took me years to actually be involved in my community because I am a patient myself. I have Gaucher disease, type 1. And I got involved in the IGA in 2012. Also, it's my 10-year anniversary of being part of IGA. I didn't realize that. It's nice. In IGA, is led by board of directors, and they are all volunteers. We have 7 to 10 people, depending on who is applying to be a board member. We were actually struggling also with board members. We do have employees. We have the CEO, we have the communication officer, the finance officer, and from recently I have become the projects officer. And my responsibility are very different programs that I will show you now, but they are all done by volunteers. Almost, completely done by volunteers. And I'm actually very happy to see that one of my volunteers is on this call here, on the Zoom call. And it was a nice surprise to see that she is listening to this webinar. She's one of my best volunteers, amazing woman doing wonders in Africa. So what is the goal of the volunteer program? After thinking that we have volunteers in IGA, but it's never enough people, and there is always a lot of work to do. So I thought we need a goal, and the goal was actually to help us. This volunteer program is needed because we need help, we need support, and we need structure, because without structure, volunteers come and go, and you don't see the impact, and you don't do retention, and you forget to do recognition, and everything falls through the cracks. But when you develop a structure, things change. So why do we have volunteers? And we have a small number of board members, a small number of staff team. We are an international organization who needs to cover the world globally. So we need to cover every country in the world, which is not possible. There are so many projects that we don't implement because we don't have the time or the capacity, and they can be done without money. So we realized if we have volunteers, more projects will be done, more impact we are going to have on our community. And when we see our work program that we have, our strategy for IGA, we see a lot of projects, and we realize that a lot of board members are actually carrying a lot of burden. And instead of, being able to have more strategic look to lead the organization forward, they have to struggle with a lot of different small tasks and projects. And, they are then stuck with that, and they have to balance the work, family, and volunteer time, and all the expectations that we have from the community. And it's not easy. Sometimes you are like, oh my God, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown because it's not easy to do this. But you don't want to quit because it gives you satisfaction that you're doing something for your community. This is a very nice map that I love. It shows that we have 43 volunteers from 36 countries, and they are involved in 11 projects. Last year, they volunteered over 1,400 hours, and this is just a ballpark. This is not counting the board members, and not everybody gave their timesheets, as I said before. These are some of our volunteers, and they work in a very different kinds of projects. before in the presentations from Hannah and Daniel was mentioned that sometimes you have different tasks or sometimes you have different projects and you need people with different skills. Like, I don't know, Anne from Belgium helped us with translation in French and with reaching out patients and families in Belgium. The Go with Gaucher project is a project for young people with Gaucher disease. And now this project is led by those young people who came out of that project. I came out of that project too, long time ago. Then we have the home therapy project where we have a lot of people who need to give their comments. We need patients and caregivers to give their comments, but we also need nurses, we also need doctors, and all of them are involved in this project. So we work together, not only with Gaucher patients and families, we also work with rare disease organizations and people who are connected with rare disease differently. We also work with doctors and with nurses. We also work with medical students. And who else do we include? Researchers also. Yes, we include everybody who wants to be included. Sometimes when we don't have conflict of interest, we also involve people who volunteer from the pharma companies because they can give the time and expertise too, and sometimes they are needed to be here for our projects. This is the regional manager program, and all of these people here are volunteers. We have 6 regions and 9 volunteers, and we are planning to expand this program further in the future, again, just through cooperation and volunteers. So when I say regional manager program, I have to explain to you that actually that's a program because we divided the world in a couple of regions. Yes, IGA has 56 member organizations from different countries, but we have a lot of countries where we don't have contact and we don't have organization. So this is why we invented the regional manager program. And these people actually do first desk research, internet research, and communication on the ground in these countries to communicate with doctors and to find patients and families. And then we support them to actually make an organization, grow an organization, and fight for their rights. So we support them throughout all of this process. I actually support this program too. And this is a new program that we started last year. This is the Guardian Champions program. So IGA launched the Guardian Registry, and this is a registry for patient-reported outcomes and observer-reported outcomes, and it's owned and governed by the global patient community. So it's owned by the patients, by IGA. It's not owned by a pharma company. And this was very important for us because there are no cure or medicine. There is no cure. There is no medicine for type 3 and type 2 Gaucher. And with this register, we are going to give a better or stronger voice to this part of our community. And it all depends on the people signing in the registry. So we have doctors, patients, medical students and researchers, and parents and caregivers helping us to actually make this registry a success. We just launched this at the end of April, and we already have people registering in step by step. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what happens. Okay, how to find volunteers. So this was something that I realized that before in IGA, before we had this structure, we actually went up to people from our member organizations or people that we know are active on Facebook or social media, and we would say to them, "Oh, would you like to volunteer? How are you? Are you interested in doing this or that?" And it was very like a closed circle, if I may say that. But when we realized that we have too much work and few people to do the work, we actually decided to start advertising. So we have a special section on our webpage about our volunteer program, and you can see short biographies and photos from volunteers and what do they do in our organization. We also do that on social media. We promote volunteers and what they do. But we decided that we need a volunteer description, we need specific tasks, we need to use social media, we do use the newsletter, but I have to tell you that at the moment 70% of the people who are volunteers actually saw our post on social media, mostly on Facebook and Instagram too, not so much on LinkedIn. After you do the volunteer description with the specific tasks, as they explained before, after you advertise, you need to interview people. Again, this was explained. You need to do the orientation. What I like to do is also do mentoring, or having somebody responsible for the volunteer. So if we have a project for translation of the Gaucher booklet in different languages, there is a person who is leading that project. So when I find translators in different languages, volunteers who want to translate, these volunteers will meet up with this responsible person for that project, and he is responsible for them. Of course, once in 3 months, I always check up with the responsible, the leader, but also with the volunteers, because I want to hear the story from both sides. I want to get the feedback, and I want to see, what we missed, what we can do better, and how we can do our work better with the volunteers. Communication is the most important thing in the volunteer program. If you don't communicate with people, the program will not move forward. Even if you have a dedicated person, if that person doesn't communicate, that's it. So it's very important. Yes, you do the recognition, the retention, you do the induction, but you have to do also follow-up and evaluation. If you don't do that, the program, you won't know what's wrong with the program, what can be better, and what's good with the program, and you need to step it up and make it even better. So do not forget that. This is, I just wanted to show you a short description of a job description. So don't get me wrong, I'm not posting this on Facebook. On Facebook, I'm saying I need somebody who can translate from Spanish. We have around 10 pages. And if you want to learn more, you can click on the post. And then they click and learn more. But on social media, you have to be short and to the point and have a very nice picture on it. Sometimes it helps to be funny also, saying we are not good in Spanish, we want to be, please help us out. They spoke about volunteer recognition before. I can also mention some stuff that we've done in IGA, like the picture I've shown, because that they were able to be present at our Biennale meeting. That's one thing. Giving the backpacks as something symbolic to have from IGA because they are volunteers. Giving out certificates to volunteers, like thank you for being part of the program. The program achieved this and this thanks to your involvement. Also, we ask volunteers to input in our work program, because if you've been with us for a year or two, you deserve to be a part of the conversation. So when we do our work program, we ask our volunteers for comments and suggestions. We also give leadership roles on projects. Some of the volunteers start with one project, then they decide that they are better in something else, they continue with another project, and that's okay. You need to be flexible with people. We also promote people, as I said. We share stories, accomplishments, biographies, and photos. I actually did a poster presentation at the conference for the International Working Group for Gaucher disease in front of doctors and researchers. And I'm going to do one at the European Conference for Rare Diseases. I have my poster there too. You will probably see it, hopefully, if I manage to get the technology right in there. So there are many different things you can do with small finances and small budgets, but don't forget to communicate with people, because telling people that they are appreciated, that they are important, that's something you have to do. So yes, I know you are all having problems with a lot of work, with limited human resources, limited financial resources, and limited time. And we all have this problem, no matter if you're international or national organization or local. In North Macedonia, where I come from, I actually lead a patient organization called Life with Challenges. And at the beginning, it was just me, one person doing everything. And no, it was not easy. And I felt exhausted and burnt out and nervous and stressed out, a lot of anxiety. And then I decided that I need help. So I asked help from the patient and parent community, and also from my friends, my family, all the companies I knew in my city that I lived in, and then in the country. So I actually gave out things for other people to do. Like one marketing company did our web page and rebranding. I have a parent leading the social media. She posts, she shares, she comments, she answers to people. When she needs help, I'm here for her. At the beginning, she was asking for approval, but then I let her go to be on her own. So step by step, you have to do the confidence. As previously said from Hannah and Daniel, yes, specific tasks with little supervision. Focus on this year's work program. What do you want to do this year? What are the tasks? What are the projects? Who can help you out? Who will be the best person to do this? Do you know people that can do it? If you don't know, advertise on social media. Go on a radio and talk about your organization and what kind of help do you need. Sometimes it's difficult to get on television. For me, it's easy because I was previously a journalist, so I knew a lot of people in the media. So I got a lot of slots, which was great. But if you can't do that, do as much as you can to be in the public so people can hear about you. And don't forget to share your accomplishments, because usually people go out and complain about a lot of stuff. Yes, I do stress out the problems that we have as a community, the issues and things that need to be resolved by the government. But I also mentioned a lot of the good work that we've done together with the government and with the local community and with the volunteers. So people get, more enthusiastic to actually get in and be a part of the small and little organization. So I've came to the conclusions. I hope I'm not out of time. I talk very fast. I'm sorry for that. If something was not clear, please let me know about that. So we do have a volunteer program strategy, because now it's an established system to recruit and to retain volunteers and to do orientation. We do have a lot of policies. We actually made a volunteer handbook, but this volunteer handbook was actually made from the board member handbook that we had, because all the internal rules and policies and GDPR and duality of interest and conflict of interest, everything was already made for the board members and for the staff that we had in IGA. So we just adapted these policies for the volunteers so they can actually read them. I know it's not easy to explain everything to each volunteer that comes to you. So usually when we do advertising, we ask for a bunch of volunteers at the same time. After we get a lot of volunteers, I set up interviews. I talk with all of them. I'd also do reference check, but I don't call the references that they write in their biographies. I actually check where they work. And then I try to get in contact with those organizations that they've mentioned that they volunteered in. And I try to get answers from those organizations, writing a nice email. Hello, this person was volunteer with you. Now they want to volunteer with us. We are very happy to accept this volunteer, but we would like to actually know a little bit more. Could you give us some reference? How are you satisfied with the communication and with the involvement of this person? Usually we get an answer, and that's good. Sometimes it's not a good answer, which is also, a good thing that we check up. A lot of people actually say they want to volunteer, they get in, and then they do nothing. So it happens. You cannot be successful always, but you have to try and try and try and be persistent. After the interviews and the check, I send all the documents to the volunteers to read. And then I set up a group Zoom call with 5 or 10 people to explain the documents, because it usually takes me an hour and a half to go through all of them and make sure that everything is clear for all of the people. So I have to say that I'm very happy to be presenting the volunteer program, because it's success because of the people that are in it. And it enabled us to have increased impact and realize more projects. There is less burden for the board members, and they can now focus more on strategy. We have increased skill set because, we have people helping us with social media, especially with Instagram, young people, because we don't know a lot about that. So we need help. And now we are actually trying to find somebody to help us with TikTok, which is very new for most of us. So step by step, you have to expand the community support, and it shows, it really shows. Yeah, and it's amazing. So we have to change the world, and for that we need volunteers. So yeah, if you're interested in volunteering with us, let me know. Yeah, and any questions, I'll be happy to answer, and my slides can be shared, no problem.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vesna. It's amazing what you've done with the volunteer program at the IGA, and I'm really grateful that everyone had a chance to listen to that. We are unfortunately out of time. However, if you have answered a question or asked a question up until this point, Hannah has been busily answering lots of the questions in the Q&A. There's an answer via type option. So check those out. And also, I'm sure our panelists would be happy to potentially answer any questions either through us or through their contact details. So I just want to say a massive thank you again to all of our speakers and for all of you guys for attending. And I'm just going to do a quick Beacon plug now. So I'm just going to share my screen. So here is just a little bit about what Beacon has got coming up. So we've got some face-to-face events, which is very exciting. We're really happy and excited to get back to face-to-face. We've got an in-person workshop on the 13th of July on demonstrating impact, and that's in London. We also have the Cambridge Rare Disease Showcase on the 6th of July. So that is a networking evening. It's going to be really great. We'll have lightning talks from the rare disease community. So we'd love to see some of you guys there. And we have the second in this series, and this one will be on employing staff. So again, everyone, I won't keep you any more time because we've gone over a little bit, but I just want to say a massive thank you once again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.